While our kids are going to New Kids, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today. His name is Richy Large. He is the Southwest Oklahoma FCA huddle leader for all of Southwest Oklahoma. I'm going to just tell my story in FCA. When I was a kid, it was huge. Okay, I was really involved in it, and it gave me another outlet through sports to share with people my belief in Christ. We had great people back then, Jeff Martin and all those good guys. Well, FCA in Lawton kind of went, not vanished, but it was, kind of here and there until 3 years ago when Richy came. And he's been here the last 3 years, done a great job. He's super active in the schools and getting stuff together. And I'm really proud that the last 3 years we've kind of made a friendship. And so you guys come welcome Richy Large.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate you. It's good to be back with all of y'all. I'll tell you, there's two benefits to wearing masks if you're here. One is when you sing, no one can hear you. You can just sing as loud. I turned to Coach and said, "Man, I've never sounded so good." And his wife goes, "It's because no one can hear you." And that may be the truth. I don't know. The second thing is, listen, if you don't want to wear your mask to church, volunteer to speak. Because they told me I could take it off when I talked, and I thought, yeah, you need me back next week? That's great. It is good to be here with you guys this Sunday. I was in the drive-thru at McDonald's a few weeks ago. I needed a Coke. You ever just, like some of you run to Starbucks? I run to McDonald's, and here's why I'm cheap. Because you can get any size drink for $1. And it's $1.09. I tip a dime, and they get a penny extra out of me. I don't care. I'm not going to miss that. Eventually, in 100 days I will. But so I'm in line, and the unique thing about drive-thrus now, if you've noticed, is they have two stations to order, but they converge into one line. And so it typically alternates, right? Like I was on the inside order lane. There was another person on the outside order lane. And the person in front of that person had went, so typically I ordered my Coke. I'm thinking it's my turn to go. And the car in the outside lane had a whole nother plan of attack. I'm pretty sure she went from 0 to 10 feet in half a second. And she was not going to let me in. She floored it and got there, and she had her window still down, and my window was up. And I was in the, and like, you've done this before, or you've been a part of this, you can sense when somebody's staring at you. And I had, the majority of communication is nonverbal. I don't know if you realize that, which means that your facial expressions, how you carry yourself, says way more than what you say verbally. And I had nonverbal communication going on, and I felt like I was just staring a hole through her, right? And as I was wanting, I didn't do it, this pastoral person, FCA, Christ follower, Holy Spirit moment, said, don't do it. My finger was on the button. She's rolling her window up, and I could see that little glance out of the corner of her eye. She knew what she did, right? And I wanted to roll my down and say something to her. She's rolling hers up. I said probably plenty with my nonverbal communication, like many of us do at times, right? But there were some things I certainly wanted to share. And there was a part of me, let me just be honest with you here, there was a part of me too that thought, I know what she's doing. She's going to buy my Coke. That was wishful thinking. She didn't buy my Coke. I was like, $1, come on, it's $1.09, right? So next time you're going to drive to McDonald's, pay for the person behind you. Let me know when you're going to do that, and I'll get right behind you. And we can cover that real quick. And I share that story because it just reminds me that conflict is everywhere. There is conflict no matter where you're at or what time of day. This is just part of our life, right? Whether it's in a drive-thru at McDonald's or whether it's in the car on the way to church, can I just tell you the majority of great conversations that I've had with my wife have happened on the way to church. Because it's that Sunday morning when, if you got young ones, they don't want to get dressed with what you've picked out for them. They don't want to sit still so you can fix their hair, right? If it's older kids, they're still in bed and you're trying to roll them out and just roll them into some clothes and hope that some kind of brush or comb goes through their hair and some kind of brush goes in that mouth, right? And there's always this, who did you get? What are you doing? And by the time you get in the car, and we had a van, we're the van fam, right? You are like, you're swinging at kids. You're like, I told my wife, I said, just slam on the brakes. They'll come right to you, right? And it's just, it really is true. It's like Sunday mornings I would dread sometimes because I just knew that there was going to be a battle. There's going to be a conflict. We can't avoid conflict. It's in every relationship, right? It's in your marriage relationship. It's in your work relationships. It's in your friendships. It's in your neighborhood. It's in Walmart. It's in the airport. It's everywhere. And so what I think today for us is that we need to learn how to deal with and how to handle conflict. I know that it's inevitable. I know that I'm not always perfect in handling it, whether it be a verbal or a nonverbal response, like the McDonald's situation. But I also know that I can't avoid it. And there are certainly some benefits to conflict. So I want to just spend some time with you this morning on talking about how do we handle conflict when it comes our way. We're going to be really in the book of Proverbs the majority of our time together this morning. We're going to float around through several different verses. They're going to come up on the screen for you, but I'm also going to share some verses that may not come on the screen for you. That's fine. You're welcome to write those down. I'm going to give you 3 points today that I think are very important for us to remember when conflict comes. How do we handle conflict? Now, I've already told you that conflict is really, it's unavoidable. Maybe even this morning you've been one who's experienced that with somebody sitting next to you or somebody who just went back to the kids area, right? But did you know there are 4 different ways, or really there's 4 types of people in how they handle conflict. Let me share these with you. And this, as I read these descriptions to you, see which one fits your style of handling conflict. Okay, here we go. Here's the first one. The first one is called the competitor. Now, when I share the names of these, you're going to probably begin to fill in the space of what this kind of person is and how they handle conflict. But here's the competitor for you. See if this is you. It's your way or the highway, okay? You're bound and determined to win no matter the cost. All right? Okay, are you the competitor? It also says you blame and accuse others of being wrong. You're always right. Amen. Okay? I love this too. You're going to get the final word in if it's the last thing you do. Even if it's just a or told you. I mean, even if you just put the period at the end of that person's sentence, you're going to get the last word in. That's the competitor. I don't know how many of you are competitors outside of conflict, but if you are, you're probably a competitor inside of conflict. Here's the second style, or the second type of person. It's called the doormat. The doormat. Listen to this. See if this is you. You let others take advantage of you. Saying no has never been easy for you, so you become a doormat for others to walk on, which makes you angry. It goes on to say that you won't say or do anything because you don't want to make anyone mad at you. If you're a people pleaser in the room, you might also be a conflict doormat, right? Because you just won't speak up for yourself, you don't want to ruffle feathers, and you just let people walk over you. That's the doormat. Here's another one. It's called the bolter. The bolter, okay? Not the boulder, but the one who bolts, right? So here we go. In difficult situations, you bolt. You avoid conflict at all costs, no matter how angry a situation has made you. You tell yourself that there's nothing you can do about it, and you rarely find a solution for your problems. You just bottle them up. That's the bolter. When I read this description, I just want to tell you, first of all, I'm a huge Seinfeld fan. I love sitcoms because I love to laugh. I don't know if any of you in this room ever watched Seinfeld or whatever, but there's an episode where George's father, Frank Costanza, implements this conflict tool called Serenity Now. And anytime there was conflict between him and someone else, he would just throw his hands up and look at the sky and go, "Serenity now! Serenity now!" And throughout the whole show, they're saying serenity now every time there's a conflict or there's an issue. And then you get to the end of the show and everybody that's been doing it just blows up. And the guy who created this serenity now says, "Serenity now, insanity later." Right? And it's true, right? If we bottle it up, and this is the way I used to be. I don't know that I necessarily bolted from conflict, but I would hold things in. And then whenever something just pushed the right button, boom, I blew up, right? Serenity now became insanity in that moment, right? And that's the bolter. Now here's what we're all shooting for in conflict. Here's the fourth one. This one is the team builder. It says when you have a conflict with someone, you stay focused on what happened rather than launching an attack. It goes on and says that you try to resolve the conflict by meeting in the middle or compromising. If you can't compromise, you agree to disagree and you move on. That's the team builder. That ultimately is where we all want to land. And maybe you saw yourself in all four of those styles of people who handle conflict. Maybe you found some of yourself being a competitor. Maybe at times you've noticed that you've been a doormat. Or maybe you realize that, man, I'm a bolter. I'm gone. I don't want no part of conflict. Or maybe you're sitting here and you've dealt with it long enough and you've learned how to become a team builder. And what I've noticed about conflict in my life as I handle it, as I face conflict, there are several factors that seem to enhance how I respond to conflict. For example, if I'm tired or fatigued, I'm pretty on edge. I tend to be more susceptible to conflict. You might agree with that. And maybe we're all at it this time, right? Have you noticed that in these last 5 or 6 months of this, since this pandemic has started, that emotions run a little bit higher, right? We're fatigued. We're mentally fatigued. We're physically fatigued. It causes us to handle conflict a little bit different. Also, it affects our mood. So our mood will determine a lot of how we handle conflict, right? Am I good mood, a bad mood? Am I just moody? Okay? That affects how we handle conflict. How about stress? I'm sure no one in this room feels stressed right now, right? No one in here is on edge. I'm sorry, man, I make a lot of references to movies. You're like, do you watch or do anything besides watch TV? I actually do, but TV is something that is an issue with me. I like it. It's created. I watch it. But the movie Shrek, if you've seen Shrek, the first one, not number 21, I don't know how many there were, like 3 or 14. But in the first one, the donkey comes barreling in at the end, right? Fiona's about to marry little Prince Charming dude. I can't remember his name. Lord Farquaad or something, right? I mean, who wrote that? Okay? One day, didn't they know someone like me is going to stand up and try to pronounce that name and like mess that up? And so she's not wanting to, Shrek's over here, he won't do anything. And the donkey comes riding in on the dragon and busts into the middle of that and says, "Look out, I'm a donkey on edge." You remember that? That's when I think of stress, man. Sometimes I recite that to myself, Coach. Look out, I'm a donkey on edge. My players, when I coach, would probably tell you that's true. They could probably tell whenever Coach Large was having one of those days or in that mood. Stress certainly has a part of that in conflict, but I think personality does as well. I think personality has a huge role in how we handle conflict or how we deal with conflict. Some of us may just have a personality where we're pretty hard-headed, pretty strong-willed. I don't think there's anybody in this room that always thinks they're right, maybe. Elbow the person next to you, okay? So it's just, some of it's just our DNA, it's our personality that affects conflict. But it's been interesting as I've studied more about conflict, I've also realized that there are great benefits to conflict. I think all of us in the room would agree. Now, we may not think in the moment, but as we stop and look back at conflict situations that we've been through, I think we would see that. And here's what I found reading a few articles. What's really good about the internet at times is that you can Google anything. What's really bad about the internet at times is you can Google anything, right? And so I've read way more articles than I needed to read, but let me just share with you I know you're like, are you ever gonna use this? I promise you, this is the main source of today's message, okay? Hang in there, all right? I have one, see? But I read this article about conflict and some of the benefits of conflict. And let me just share with you a quote from this article and some of the benefits. First thing it said was a benefit is that when you're in conflict, it opens our eyes to see new ideas. So just think about maybe some conflicts you've been a part of. And they were beneficial because, I didn't see it that way, or, I didn't think about that. And you realize that there is another way to accomplish a certain goal. So it opens our eyes to new ideas. It allows us to verbalize our needs. Right? Some of us won't say anything until maybe conflict happens, and we just kind of set on maybe an idea. But with conflict, it allows you to verbalize your needs. Now, how you verbalize that is huge in your conflict, and we're going to talk about that. But that's a benefit of conflict. Number 3 was it teaches us to listen. This is huge, right? This has been really huge for me, and especially early on in my marriage. I was not a listener. I might be a hearer, like maybe you are right now, which you know that I'm saying something, but a listener would be able to say back to me a little bit about what I'm saying. So I'm a huge Charlie Brown fan. Here I go. Here's your reference, right? If you know anything about the cartoon Charlie Brown, when they were in school in class, the teacher was like, wah, 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 wah. I mean, that was what it sounded like in the cartoon, and that's probably what it sounded like in their head, and that may be exactly what you're hearing right now. You're like, can I flip the channel? I'm sorry, I'm here for another hour and a half. Just kidding. If somebody throws something at me, you just walk up here. If I can get the talking, coach. You just come up and say, that's enough, right? Another benefit of conflict is that it does lead to solutions. It will lead to solutions to some very needed solutions for problems that you may have. Listen to this quote from this article. It says, why conflict is a good thing. The author writes, as long as everything is going along smoothly, it's easy to be considerate and respectful of another person's needs. They're in no way interfering with our own, but the emergence of a conflict can change all that. Now we can feel threatened, anxious, and angry. The same person whom we enjoyed working with yesterday now seems like an adversary, right? And you know why that is? It's because most of our experience with conflict has been negative, right? Most of our experience with fighting or with disagreeing, or whatever word you want to use, we've chosen today to use the word conflict. There are a lot of other adjectives to describe that, right? But most of the time, we have had negative experiences with conflict, and that's why we struggle with it so much. The reason behind that is most of us, when we enter conflict, is we are trying to win the fight, right? We're trying to win the discussion. We're trying to win the conflict. There's a book written by Craig Rochelle. It's called From This Day Forward. It's a book for married couples or couples who are going to be married. And whenever I do premarital counseling, it's a book that I give to those couples to read. And chapter number 2 is really my favorite chapter to walk through with married couples or new couples or people who are about to be married. And it's titled Fighting Fair. And in chapter 2, Craig lays out the game plan for how you handle conflict inside of a marriage. I think the game plan for how you handle conflict outside of marriage as well. But he says this statement, and I think this is our sticky statement for this morning. And all that means for you today is that this is the grand idea behind our message today, is that we don't fight for victory, but we fight for resolution. Right? We don't fight for victory, but we fight for resolution. And that is such a different approach to conflict than most of us, if we're honest in this room, take when we're having those discussions, right? When there is that fight, when there is a disagreement or a butting of heads. I know for me, I like to win, okay? I'm a competitor. And so it's easy for me to, especially early on in my life in general and in my marriage especially, that when me and my wife would have issues or conflicts, I just wanted to win. I didn't really listen to what she had to say or what the reason was behind our situation. I just knew I had something I had to get out. I had some words. I would hold it all in until that one moment, and then I would just blah right on you, right? Because it's natural. We just want to be victorious. But the solution to handling conflict is not winning, but finding a resolution, meeting in the middle somewhere, right? That's why we want to be team players. That's the type of conflict people we want to be. So I love that idea. That's what's driving us today, is that we fight for resolution, not for victory. We fight for resolution, not for victory. So I told you I was going to give you 3 things today. I fully believe that will help you as you walk out the door and fight with your spouse or your kids or the person parked next to you, whatever, okay? So here's the first point. If you're taking notes, the first thing that I want you to write down is, when conflict comes, how you respond matters. When conflict comes, how you respond matters. Now, we're fixing to jump into the Bible. This is our foundation for what we're going to do today. I will tell you this with Proverbs. Proverbs is going to give us some practical wisdom, which means if you've read any Proverbs, and you probably have, if you've been a follower of Jesus for a while, you may be the person that reads through Proverbs every month, and you can quote these verses, but Proverbs is just full of practical wisdom. But what we want to do with practical wisdom today is also find practical application. So what I'll do at the end of each point is I'll take you to James. You won't have to go there, and we'll look at the application to what it is that we've talked about in Proverbs. Does that work? Okay? So that first thought for us today is that when conflict comes, how we respond matters. We're going to be in Proverbs 15:1. Proverbs 15:1 says this: "A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare." Man, what wise words, right? Man, Solomon knew how to pen things. Okay? A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. I struggle with this immensely. I have been given the gift of sarcasm. Anybody else? Anybody else in this room sarcastic? If you're a sarcastic person, this is a struggle for you. And let me tell you why. It's because a gentle answer is not always what first erupts out of you, all right? Or it's not the first thought in your mind. See, I taught middle school for about 8 years, and I always told people middle school was like a haven for sarcastic people. And all I mean by that is that I'm standing in front of like 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders, and especially the 6th and 7th graders. And my last year to teach, I had a whole classroom full of 6th grade girls at one time, teaching them science. That was I had an afro back in the day. I lost so much hair I can't even. But I would just continually sarcastic was just there, like they teed it up and somebody had to hit it, and that was me, right? And so I never was very good at that gentle answer, right? And that same thing applies in conflict, a gentle answer. And like I shared earlier, when me and my wife, especially early on in our marriage, we've been married 29 years, and so I've learned. I've been in trouble enough. I've learned, okay? But early on, whatever would start our conflict was just about, okay, say what you need to say, because as you're saying it, I'm processing my response because you need to hear what I got to say. And I'm a yeller. Like I would talk loud and she would talk, and then I would just talk above her. Are you that type? Like if someone's talking and you want to get your point across, you just talk louder. And then eventually you become a screamer. And so all I did was I stirred the fire of anger. I didn't deflect it. I was the second part of this verse, which says that harsh words make tempers flare. I saw this example, and like I mentioned before, I think two of the greatest places for conflict are Walmart and the airport. Okay? If you've ever flown, you've probably either had a flight delayed or missed a flight or saw someone else who was at the counter in front of you, letting that person have it. Like they had any control, right? Those are the two places I've seen some of the most interesting places of conflict. Well, I was in Walmart a few weeks ago, and I was at the customer service desk, and I was waiting to receive something. And I'm just they asked me to stand off to the side. I stood off to the side. I'm just kind of standing there, and I'm a people watcher. One of the reasons I go to Walmart is just to see what cool masks are out now, what people are wearing, okay? I just keep waiting for the Darth Vader mask. Somebody just show up at work with the Darth Vader mask on. I should just go get a job at Walmart and just wear one. If you have one, I'll try it, okay? But I'm just standing there, and like it's the customer service is kind of in a cubby, kind of like that right there. And all of a sudden, I see this guy come running across. Where's the manager? Where's the manager? I'm like, oh, this is about to get good. Man, this is awesome. And the manager comes from around the corner. I didn't know where he was at. He comes around the corner, and this guy walks up to him, and you know when someone's serious, they're pointing, right? Like when you want to make a point, you point, okay? I mean, whether you're coaching in conflict, whatever, you point. And this guy was just letting this manager have it. That person down there, and he started using words that were 4 letters, and he put them together really eloquently. I mean, there were some phrases I'd not heard about, or whatever. I thought, man, that's an interesting way to say that. He was just giving it to him, and the manager was just kind of standing there. I'm watching. I'm like, maybe I should get my phone out and video this, right? And he he's getting him, and he just begins to walk with him down to where this person who works at Walmart, this guy had an issue with. And I really wanted to go walk with them, as well as probably everybody else that was watching this scene unfold. And as they walked off, I thought, man, this will be interesting. I'm going to preach on conflict in a few weeks. This might be a sermon illustration. So I guess the situation gets handled. The manager kind of comes back to the customer service area where I'm at. He kind of walks in front of me. I said, hey, sir. I said, I'm going to preach on conflict in a few weeks. I would love to know how you handled that situation. And he kind of looked at me and laughed. And he began to share what he goes, when that stuff happens, you just need to listen. Just listen to what they're saying. And then when you respond, you just respond with a solution and care. And so he goes, I just told him, he said, look, I'm sorry this happened. This lady that you're complaining about is on break. As soon as she gets off break, I will sit down and meet with her. And that's all he had to do. The guy left, and I don't know what else came from that. But I thought, man, if that's not a good picture of Proverbs 15:1, I'm certainly not, but that certainly was. A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. Gentle responses. How do we respond when people are attacking us or we feel like they're attacking us, right? How do we respond when people have something to say, but we also have something to say because we need to defend ourselves? We need to respond with gentle answers. It doesn't always happen. I've learned I'm better at it, but I'm not perfect at it. But a gentle answer certainly deflects anger where harsh words stir up that fire inside, right? What's our application to this? That's practical wisdom that Solomon gives us in Proverbs 15:1. But how do we apply this to our life? That's where I think we go to James 1:19. James 1:19 says everyone should be what? Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Y'all have heard that verse before. You may have it memorized. It may be, if you struggle with temper or whatever, it may be on your mirror in your bathroom. But what I love about that verse when it starts is James doesn't say, hey, you, and you should do this, but you're fine. He says everyone. Everyone should be what? Quick to listen. So application to point 1 for me, and I think for us today, is to be quick to listen. Now, not here, because what happens is we are quick to speak, right? But when we're quick to listen, it allows us to hear what the other person is saying, to process what their issue is, and to respond with a gentle answer. Coaching girls basketball, especially my young middle school girls, I would do this at the beginning of the year all the time. Because there's a difference, like I told you before, between hearing something and listening to something. And so I would do this all at the end of every practice. If you, at any point, have ever played sports, or you got in trouble playing sports, you had to run, right? Okay, so as a track coach, we had shirts that said, our sport is your sport's punishment. Because we ran because we wanted to, and you ran because you had to. But at the end of every practice in basketball, it's something you may not realize, but you run up and down all the time. You better be in shape. And when we get to the line, the baseline, whether the baseline or sideline, I would say this to them. I say, on the whistle, I want you to run down and back. And then I would get the whistle up here, and I'd say, ready, go. And about half of them would take off because I said go. I was like, oh, I'd start laughing, like, oh, you got another one. Why? I said, because you're not listening to me. You just heard me. I said, on the whistle, and y'all went on go. Okay. I said, hey, look, this time, when I say go, you're going to run down and back. Okay. Ready? I can't even whistle. I can't even whistle. Just imagine in your mind there's a whistle, okay? And I'd whistle, and half of them would take off. Oh, and the other people would go, oh, you're not listening. And I would do that, and we would start with maybe 2 sprints, Coach, and then by the time we got done with this little game I was playing with them, we'd be up to like 10. And they hated it, but what did they do? They began to be listeners, not just hearers. We've got to be quick to listen when we want to respond properly in conflict. Here's point number 2. When conflict comes, know when to stop. When conflict comes, you got to know when to stop. We're Proverbs chapter 17, so you just flip over a page. Chapter 17, verse 14. I love this verse. It says this, starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate. So stop before a dispute breaks out. I mean, aren't these just practical and simple? But we just need to hear them. Starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate. So stop before a dispute breaks out. Now, as I think about this verse and I think about this point, I'm immediately drawn to social media. And let me just address this for a moment, okay? And here's what I mean by social media. We have the ability nowadays, because of outlets such as Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and just anything and everything, to express our opinion, to make our voice known, right? And what tends to happen is that we'll throw something out there hoping for a response. And then in that response, it creates a dialogue that allows us to continue to express what we think is truth, right? And a lot of times it may be. But the people who have a tendency to do that are also the people who are probably the aggressors and just think what we said earlier, they're always right, or they have an opinion and everyone should know what it is. And certainly we are in a time where there are lots of opinions on lots of things. One of them would be masks that we're wearing, right? How about the racial issues that we're going through? How do we handle school? We've got elections coming up. So there's a lot of things that can cause conflict. And there are a lot of people, and you may know them, and it may be you, and I'm not attacking you, but it may be that we use that as a way to build a platform for something we think needs to be said. We've got to be wise in that. Because if you look at that verse, starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate. You just start to pick, and eventually what? It's a flood, and it's out of control. It's a flood, and it's out of control. There's a, I'm going to do this one more time, but in the movie Vegas Vacation, and I don't know if you've seen Vegas Vacation. My favorite's Christmas Vacation. But Vegas Vacation, there's a part where they're taking a tour of the Hoover Dam, and Chevy Chase, Mr. Griswold, is just classic, and they're walking through this dam. Can I say that? Okay, we're talking water dam. I was like, wait a minute. But he begins to pick at the rocks, and water starts shooting through. And he tries to plug that hole, and then another hole comes up. He tries to plug that hole, and what happens? Eventually, he's got water coming out all different kinds of places by just one little pick of a spot. He's got a serious situation on his hand, right? And just like the second part of that verse says, so stop before a dispute breaks out. I think about this verse when I was coaching. It was probably my second year of coaching basketball. I'm not proud of this moment, so don't judge me on this story, okay? But I can remember we're at a junior high basketball game, and let me just set the stage for you if you're not sure what happens at a basketball game when a coach gets a technical, okay? You can see where this is going. So if you get one technical, right, the referee goes like this, and that doesn't mean he wants a timeout, okay? This or this in basketball, right? Coach means you want a timeout. This means you've said something you shouldn't have said, and you're in trouble, basically. So after one technical, the coach has to remain in his seat. After technical number 2, the coach gets sent to the dressing room and kicked out of the game. After technical number 3, I don't know what happens, but I know they get to shoot more free throws. So we're in this basketball game. I'm frustrated with my team. That's usually what led to my technicals, was my frustration on the team. But I just had those guys in stripes look like zebras. And I thought, who would take this better than a zebra right now, right? So I would unload on the official. Well, he didn't like what I was saying. Boom, technical number 1. Well, all that did was stir the embers of emotion in my heart, right? And I got one. Let's see what else we can do. I just let him have it. Technical number 2. And he does that whole thing like you would see, and he just like throws me out. I thought I was at a baseball game. And I was like, okay. So I'm walking to the dressing room. Now, you've been to a sporting event where there's been technicals. 2 things happen. The visiting fans are cheering because they're making fun of you and like, you deserve it, you got it. Your own fans are cheering because they're supporting you like you've really done something important, which it's really not true, right? Even if they don't agree with officiating, like Billy Tubbs said when he picked up that microphone way back when he was coaching at OU, he says, no matter how bad the officiating is, please don't throw things on the floor, right? I don't know if anybody remember that besides me? I'm going way back in the vault for that one, right? And so you got people cheering. My wife has slid probably as far underneath the bleachers as possible. And I'm just going to tell you, I heard about that when I got home. Don't ever do that again. I said, okay, I won't. I lied. But sad to say. But I'm walking off, and I've got this dry erase marker pen. Now, we have these dry erase boards, if you've seen any coaches with basketball games, and we draw these really cool things, don't we, Coach? And they never work, but they look really good on that board, like here. And I just remember kids going, what is that? I was like, I don't know, it looks cool. Let's see if it works. But I've got this pen in my hand as I'm walking to the dressing room, and when I got this, when I'm kicked out, I throw that pen across the floor. Boom, technical number 3. So what did I do? I got myself kicked out, my team without a coach. They got 6 free throws and the basketball. Not a good thing, right? You got to know what to argue about, when to argue, and know when to stop. What did I do? That quarrel opened a floodgate, right? So stop before a dispute breaks out. Now, I hope that you can learn from my mistakes. Whether you're coaching or not, it doesn't matter. But you've been in a dispute where that probably is a relevant reference for you. But can I tell you this? There are times where we need to stand up and say something. There are times where we need to have our voice heard. And so I want you to know that I'm not saying that we don't. I just think we've got to be wise in how we do it. As I was studying this proverb, I read this quote on wise words. Let me share it with you. It says, the conflicts or fights that wise people avoid are those minor personal matters that can easily be sacrificed. Wise people do not back down or avoid strife for justice or truth or oppressed victims, though they do always follow the rules of wisdom in any conflict. A wise person knows the difference between things to fight for and those to walk away from. And when I read that, you know where my mind immediately went? That famous theologian, Kenny Rogers. Did you know Kenny Rogers was a theologian? And he wrote a song that I think sums this up better than anything I could come up with. So let me see if you recognize this. You got to know when to hold 'em. You don't have to sing it. Know when to fold 'em. Know when to walk away. And know when to run. Right? I mean, I think there's not a better phrase that we could use to tie all this together on how do we handle conflict. We have to know when to stop. Thank you, Kenny Rogers, for the Gambler song. Right? Thank you, Kenny Rogers, for the Gambler song. How do we apply this to our life? How do we know when to stop? Well, we said that we got to be quick to listen first, right? The second thing is that we got to be slow to speak. Proverbs 21:23 says, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble. Proverbs 21:23 again says, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble. We have to be slow to speak. Slow to speak. We're slow to listen and quick to speak. Sometimes we need to flip that, right? Here's 2 things that will help you be slow to speak when you're in conflict. This is the first thing. Question you got to ask yourself, should it be said? Because once you say it, you can't reel it back in, right? I've tried, man. I'm like, whoa, it's already out, okay? It's already out. So should I say it or should it be said? Second thing is, should it be said now? Should it be said now? Because there are things that need to be said, but maybe not in that moment, right? There are some important things that we need to convey, but maybe not right then. So should it be said, and should it be said now? We've got to be slow to speak. Slow to speak. That brings us to point 3, and we're about to land this plane. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me, is this: when conflict comes, show love and kindness. When conflict comes, show love and kindness. We're going to move to Proverbs 25 and verses 21 and 22. Verses 21 and 22 says this: if your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. Now, what I love to do with Scripture, and maybe you do the same thing, is I like to place myself into a passage or into a story. And so obviously there's an enemy here, right? This conflict is not with someone that maybe is friendly, or maybe this someone who is friendly has now become an enemy. Because in reality, we probably all at some point become enemies in conflict. Why? Because we disagree about something, okay? But he says this, he says, if your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they're thirsty, give them water to drink. And this is not a literal thing. If I'm fighting with you and we're enemies at the moment, I don't say, hold up, here's some water, right? All right, it's not about that. Or say, oh, you're not yourself, you need a Snickers bar, right? Those commercials, okay? It's just this idea is that we want to show what? Love and kindness. It's simply where Jesus bases his teaching in Matthew chapter 5 on the Sermon on the Mount, verses 43 through 48. Because Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, in these verses, he says, hey, look, it's easy to love those simply who are your friends, who love you. You've heard it, he says this, he says, you've heard it said before. Love your friends and hate your enemies. He says, look, I've come with a different thought, a new way to do this. It's easy to love those who love you, but to show the love of Christ, to show the love of God, is to also what? Love your enemies. And he goes through this whole idea of exactly what this Proverbs is talking about. When conflict comes, what do? We show kindness. We show love. And how do we do that? Well, maybe it's through serving someone. Maybe it's just through listening to someone, letting them get off their chest what they're trying to get off their chest. Maybe there's something they need to say. And in doing so, he says that you heap a coal of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. I tell you what, I saw the movie Wonder, and you may have seen it too, and it's been out for a while. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago when that movie came out, about this young kid, Augie Pullman. It's a true story. He has some disabilities as a young kid and just struggled in school with what? With making friends and people making fun of him. But there was, this is just the way I am. I'm taking notes during a movie. I'm learning stuff watching a movie, and I'm taking notes. And this was said in the movie. It didn't originate in this movie. I think as I looked it up, it originated way back like in the 1800s. But it simply was this statement. It says, be kind because everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And when I think about this verse, I think about that statement. I think about conflicts that I've had or conflicts that may come my way. That is something that ever since I heard that, I began to either run through my mind while it's happening, or when it was over and I'm looking at how I responded, I think, Rich, you have no idea what that person is going through today. Every one of us in this room are fighting a hidden battle that no one knows about. Maybe not even the person you're sitting next to, who's your spouse or your best friend. And so sometimes, like we said at the very beginning, that there are things that cause conflicts to happen and cause our responses to be a certain way. It's because all of us are fighting hidden battles we know nothing about. We don't know the stress that someone else may be under. We don't know what's happened inside their family. We don't know all the different things they're dealing with. But I think if we can keep that phrase at the forefront of our mind when we enter a conflict, it allows us to be the kind of team builder in conflicts that we want to be. Someone who listens, quick to listen. Someone who is what? He's slow to speak. And so when we look at the second part of this verse, verse 22, it says, you will heap coals of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. I want to just say this first of all. God's blessing isn't based on the response of others, but it's based upon how you respond. Okay? So God's blessing in that verse that we see is not based upon how someone responds to us in conflict, but how do we respond to them? How do we respond to those people we consider our enemy? Doing some digging into verse 22, there's a couple of trains of thought here I want to share with you, and we'll be done. The first one is this. When we think of this verse, a lot of times we get the image of kill them with kindness. Have you ever heard that? And there's some truth to this, right? I think we've all either experienced it on our end, someone doing this for us or to us, or us reciprocating that to someone. Which simply means that, man, it may not be a friend, it may be a foe, it may be an enemy, but I've just listened and I've tried to serve them. I've tried to treat them with kindness, right? And what will happen is a couple of things. They will either kind of, I don't know if melt's the right word, they'll maybe melt to what you're trying to do and change their ideas and thoughts, or they'll just harden themselves. But if you go into a little bit more detail with this verse, you find some really interesting things. And so let me share with you what I found just real quick. It's not necessarily this idea that we kill them with kindness that we're trying to grab from this verse. And so what we have to do is we have to go to the Hebrew context of how this was written. And so there's some thoughts behind heaping coals that I want to share with you. And so here's something that I read. So to the contrary, the statement about heaping burning coals on the head of our enemies is parallel to the statements about blessing our enemies with food and water. So there's some parallelism here. He says that when this proverb was written, people heated their homes and cooked with fire. But sometimes a person's fire would go out during the night, and before they could cook their breakfast, they had to go to the neighbor's house to get a coal so they could relight the fire. He goes on to say in Proverbs 25, verse 22, it teaches that if the fire of your enemy goes out, and they come asking for a coal to relight their fire, instead of turning them away or giving just one, we should be extravagantly generous. How? We must keep one coal for ourselves and give all the rest of the burning coals to our enemy. One commentary said this in the book of Proverbs about this passage. Sometimes a person's fire went out, and he needed to borrow some live coals to restart his fire. It said giving a person coals in a pan to carry home on his head was a neighborly, kind act. It made friends, not enemies. Now, can you see the parallelism in this verse now? When it says, hey, give somebody a drink, be kind to that person. And by doing so, you're heaping a coal. You're giving to them something that they need. And God will bless that. Abraham Lincoln said this, and I like this. I love quotes, as you can tell, right? But listen to what Abraham Lincoln said about enemies. When asked why he did not seek to destroy his enemies, but show them leniency, he said this, he says, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? Man, that simple statement is so powerful and true. And it didn't come out of the scripture, but it came out of a man who understood conflict and how to deal with and lead through conflict. Do I not make my enemies my friends when I serve them, when I do things for them, and not to destroy them? What's our application? How do we show love and kindness? It's the last part of James 1:19. It says we got to be slow to anger, right? We got to be quick to listen. We got to be slow to speak. We got to be slow to anger. And when we apply those three things to any conflict that we're in, I think we're going to see a resolution and not worry about a victory. And that's so important. Can I tell you this as we close? The greatest conflict that any of us have is the conflict between us and God, our Creator. Can I tell you how that conflict started? In Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve decided to eat of the garden, the fruit that they weren't supposed to, sin entered the world and it broke that relationship between God and creation, God and us. And if you remember, God says, hey, look, you've created enmity between me and you. What does that mean? There is conflict. We are now enemies with one another. But can I just share you a verse in Romans chapter 5? You're going to be familiar. You don't have to necessarily turn there, but just listen to what Paul writes in Romans 5 as we think about us being at enmity with God and not being friends with God. Beginning in verse 10 of Romans 5, Paul writes, for since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son, while we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son. So now we can rejoice in our wonderful new relationship with God because our Lord Jesus Christ has made us what? Friends of God. See, this conflict between us and God can only be resolved through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I know I'm looking at a room that is small in number, but that doesn't mean that God isn't working in your heart. It also means I don't know what your relationship is with God. But what I've read in that passage in Romans 5 says there's nothing I can do about that relationship with God. It's broken until I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Because of what he did for you and me on the cross, that's the only way we can become friends of God, by placing our trust in him. So here's where we end today. Like you do every Sunday probably when there's a message, is you have an opportunity to respond to what it is that God's shared with your heart. And it's simply this: is there a conflict between you and God based upon you not trusting him with your life? And so let me just tell you this. The way to rid enmity between you and God is by placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. The work that Christ did for us on the cross resolved that conflict. When we place our faith and trust in him, that restores a relationship that sin broke thousands of years ago at the beginning of creation, right? Now, you know what else I've noticed in my life that creates conflict with God? I'm a Christ follower, man. I've trusted Jesus since I was in 7th grade. He changed my life in the 7th grade. But you know what? When he saved me, I didn't just become perfect like an angel. I still battle with sin. I don't know about the rest of you, but I still have thoughts I'm not supposed to have. I still do things I shouldn't do. I still don't do things I'm supposed to do. Man, I spend time in the day, every day, asking God to forgive me. And what I've noticed is that as I go without that repentance, my heart becomes hard and calloused. I've grieved the Holy Spirit, and now that distance that was there before because of sin now has creeped itself back in my relationship with Christ. Even though there is one there, is not the same as it was before. Why? Because sin has begun to dominate my life. And unrepented, unforgiven sin that's hardened my heart. And so that may be more where you guys are at today. Maybe you're like, man, where's God in all this? Where's the nearness that I should feel with him? And you've realized that the conflict is in what? My choices and the things that I've done and the sin that's in my life that needs to be forgiven. I just want to encourage you today before you leave, talk to one of your pastors, visit with your spouse, your parents, whatever, but don't leave unresolved conflict. It's not about winning.